All right, so now we've looked at what is done when we have an allowance. So we're estimating that amount of AR, but eventually we get to the point where we might need to write it off. So that's what we're going to look at now. So we're going to start with an example and then we'll carry it through and look at the write-off. So for this example, our business uses the aging of accounts receivable method for estimating uncollectible amounts. As at August 30th, we have the following schedule. And then we can see here at the bottom, it gives us the percentage that's estimated to be uncollectible. So there's currently a zero balance in the AFTA account. What did we record at August 30th? So aging of AR, we look at each age and we apply these different percentages. So the only time we think that we won't collect some is once it gets to be over 60 days. So we've got this $2,400 balance in that account or in that age. If we times it by 60%, we end up with 1,440 as our uncollectible amount. So again, remember this is our target AFTA. So that's what we want in the account. Well, it says here that we currently have zero in that AFTA account, so we need to book the full amount in order to get that balance. So this is just a reminder, we just completed this, so we're recording this estimate or the allowance. When we do that, we debit bad debt expense and we credit the allowance for doubtful accounts. Just to save time, I'm just going to write AFTA. And we're now booking this full amount, but only because the balance was zero. If there had been a balance, we would do the difference. Okay, so we booked that, and now it asks us what is the net AR after that adjustment. So we know that our AR amount, we've got this full 10,000 total. And then we need to subtract the AFTA. So we just booked that. We now have 1,440 in the AFTA account. And we get down to this AR net. And if we subtract that, we have $8,560. That's our carrying amount. Okay, so this is nothing new, but we'll continue this on. So we've got this estimate. We still don't know which customer, but we're just looking at this overall somewhere in 60 days. We think that we won't be able to collect 1,440. So the allowance, as we just said, AFTA is not related to a specific customer. It's an overall estimate that we don't think we can get, but we don't know yet who. However, eventually it will be determined who the specific customer is or when there's a specific customer that is not going to be able to be collected from. So when that happens and you know the specific customer, the amount that they owe that can't be collected must be written off. That's what we call it. We're going to write off the uncollectible amount. So businesses do the estimate like we saw here. So this 60%, we're estimating that amount. But they review these subledgers and they keep track of it, keep trying to collect, and they're tracking this. But eventually they have to ask that question of, can we actually collect from each of these customers? So they're looking at each of them, asking, have any gone bankrupt? Have any of them closed down? Is there any customers we've tried to reach that we can't get a hold of? If that becomes the case, and we determine that a certain customer can't pay, we write off the amount that they owe. Okay, so now we'll look at that. After repeated phone calls and attempts, our credit department is not able to contact Lloyd and Harry, the owners of Mutt Cuts. So here's Lloyd and Harry. They own Mutt Cuts. They drive this van. We've tried to reach them, but we're just not able to get a hold of them. So on September 28th, we decide that the $1,000 they still owe us will not be collected and we need to write that off. So we can go back here. We see this Mutt Cuts amount. They owe us $1,000. We know now that this particular customer we can't collect from, so we're going to write off that amount. So we've decided this on September 28th, and the entry that is done to record the write-off of now this specific AR balance, because we know our customer, is as follows. So September 28th, we're going to debit the allowance for doubtful accounts. And we credit the AR amount. And this would be, we would take it specifically out of the Mutt Cuts Limited AR subledger. And it'll be for the $1,000, as that is the amount that they owe. So when we debit the AFTA account, we're removing this amount from the pool. So when we booked here, we booked this AFTA for $1,440. We didn't know what customer wasn't going to be able to pay. So this AFTA is kind of a pool. So somebody's not going to be able to pay. When we've now figured out that Mutt Cuts is one of those customers, we're now taking this $1,000 out of that AFTA pool because we've figured out which of those customers won't pay. So we take it out of this pool, and then we also now remove it from the actual AR account because we know the specific customer. So we can take it out of that subledger. So we would say here to write off the account for Mutt Cuts Limited. Okay, so now we can figure out what is the net AR balance at September 28th. So once we've booked this entry. So if we take a look at our T accounts, well, our AR balance, we can see here was the $10,000. So we can put that in there. And in our previous entry, where we set this allowance up, we estimated it, we booked AFTA as a credit of $1,440. So we booked the bad debt and we had this allowance of $1,440. So that was where we were where we were sitting at August 30th. And that was how we got to this balance here of the $8,560. Now we need to post this entry that we just did to write them off. So we debited the AFTA, just for $1,000. So we're left with $440. And we credited AR for $1,000. So we have $9,000 left in AR and $440 in the AFTA pool. So if we do our little calculation here, wrong amount there. We've left with $9,000 in AR. We take away the AFTA amount of the $440, and our net AR that remains is $8,560. So we can compare that to before we wrote it off, right here at August 30th, we were also at $8,560. So when we wrote this off, it does not change our net AR. So this didn't change. And that's because we're not booking any new kind of expense. We're just moving these amounts. So we figured out who can't pay. So we take it out of AR and we take it out of AFTA. So each of these amounts got decreased, but by the same amount. So that gives us the resulting same amount in net AR. And that will always be the case when you're writing off. Here's our Mutt Cuts guys again. So that's always the case when we write off accounts receivable or the uncollectible amounts. It does not, first off, impact net AR, as we just saw, because we reduced the accounts receivable and the AFTA by the same amount. So no net AR change. And it also does not impact net income. And this is because we're not booking any new bad debt expense when we write off amounts. We've already estimated that expense when we did the allowance. So that was when we recorded the bad debt expense. When we actually write off the amount, we're just adjusting our AFTA and our AR. So this doesn't impact any income statement accounts, and therefore our net income is not impacted. So this not is key there. Okay, so that's what it looks like when we write off uncollectible debts. But even though we sometimes, or we figure out who the customer are and we write off a specific AR amount, it's still possible to collect that amount. So you don't call the customer up and tell them, hey, we wrote off your account, don't worry about paying us. Like, no, you still try and collect that amount. Maybe you get legal involved, so you call your lawyers and they go after that person. So you still do the work, and it's still possible to collect that. So if you've written something off and then you later collect it, this is called a recovery of bad debts. Because you thought that amount was a bad debt and you wouldn't be able to collect it, but now you've recovered that amount. And the way that we do this to record it is in 2 steps. So the first journal entry that you do is to reverse the write-off. So you just record a journal entry the opposite of what you did when you wrote it off. So you're doing the exact opposite to reverse that. And then the second step is just record the collection of cash on account. So no different than we've seen previously when we said that we collected money on account. So good old Lloyd and Harry, they're really great guys. They actually find a briefcase full of cash. Since they're these good guys, they jump in their Mutt Cuts van and they drive to the store and they pay us the remaining $1,000 that they owe. So we need to go ahead and record this recovery of the bad debts, or recovery of the amount that was previously written off. So as I said, we do this in 2 steps. The first entry is done to reverse the write-off. So if we click back here, this was the journal entry that we recorded on September 28th to write that account off. So we debited the AFTA, credited AR. Now we're just going to do the reverse. So we'll debit AR and credit AFTA. So we're putting this amount back into accounts receivable, and it would go back into the Mutt Cuts account. And we're also putting this amount back in the AFTA pool. And we'll say to reverse write-off of Mutt Cuts account. So we need to put it back through AR so that we can actually record the collection. And for the AFTA part, well, now we're putting it back in that pool because we thought we knew who wasn't going to be collectible, but we actually don't. So of this amount that was in over 60 days, we thought we knew that this amount wouldn't be collectible, but that's not actually the case. So we need to put it back in the AFTA pool, and now it must be one of these 2 collectible, or these 2 accounts that won't be collected. So we still don't know for sure, but we know it's not muck cuts. So we need to fill that AFTA pool back up, and therefore we credit that amount. So now that we've reversed the write-off, the second journal entry that is done is just to record the collection. So as I said, just like we would always do to record collection on account, we debit cash and we credit accounts receivable. And this would be from the muck cuts ledger. So we receive the $1,000 and we record the collection on account. Okay. So that is a look at the allowances, how we estimate them, recording that, how we record an actual write-off when we figure out the customer, and then finally recording the recovery of the bad debt if the customer that we previously wrote off ends up paying us. So you can go ahead and do some practice. Again, I've noted below the video what questions you can do, and then review the solution videos once you've practiced those.